The Retreat, Daphne, Part 2. Daphne would usually be annoyed by Lacey's chipper attitude, but this morning she let it slide. The negative pregnancy test was providing some buoyancy. After she finished counting the drawers and logging into the POS, Daphne walked into the kitchen. She saw Lacey chatting with Callum and she rolled her eyes. Lacey thought she was sly about her crush, but it was obvious to pretty much everyone else in the world, save for maybe Callum himself. Callum only had eyes for Grace. Lacey looked at Daphne sideways before scurrying into the front of the house. Yeah, you better run, Daphne thought. Lord knows you will be all summer, she thought. She shuffled over to the server window and slammed down the binder holding all of the function sheets for the season's events. It was quite literally bursting at the seams. Callum didn't even look up, but she could see him smiling. I hear you're in the bad place, he said as he continued to bustle around the kitchen. I think this has got to be a record for you. Who says I'm in the bad place? She asked, but she already knew. Even you have to admit that the amount of events this summer is absolutely bananas. It's always bananas, Daph, and we always get through it together. She rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help but smile. Daphne had known Callum since middle school. They were both local to the area, something that was becoming more and more rare these days. Despite her status as the weird foster care kid, Callum had always been kind to her. Daphne's mother, Stacy, had been an addict when Daphne was born. She didn't even know who the father was. Her own mother, Daphne's grandmother, Judy, filed for custody of Daphne as soon as she was born. She attempted to get Stacy into a prestigious rehab facility, but Stacy had refused. She had fled Colorado, and Judy became Daphne's sole guardian. The last Daphne had heard, her mother was up in Seattle, homeless and still an addict. Daphne had always wondered about her mom, but she liked life with her grandmother. She ran a tight ship, and Daphne could see now how much her earlier self needed that structure. That was all fine and well until Judy found a lump on one of her breasts when Daphne was 11. Judy put up a good fight, but in the end, she was too old and tired. Judy wasn't married, and she had no other children or living relatives. Daphne became a ward of the state and entered into foster care 2 weeks before her 12th birthday. She had bounced around between foster families in the Denver metro area throughout the next 6 years, never finding anywhere that felt like home. The only constant in her life had been school, and she had met Callum in their 7th grade English class. Callum was not at all interested in school, while Daphne worked hard, but they bonded over being outcasts. Callum was very publicly the black sheep of his family. His parents were very wealthy, and his sister Caitlin attended a prestigious private school in the area. Callum, who had chosen to attend the public school where he and Daphne met, said he never felt like he fit in. Their friendship continued throughout high school. Together, they would smoke weed underneath the bleachers, talking about life. At the time, Daphne thought she was hopelessly in love with Callum. Looking back now, she could see that what she was really looking for was a father. Callum cared for her deeply, unconditionally. Despite her supposed feelings, their relationship never breached the friend zone, and Daphne was eternally grateful for it, especially with how closely they worked together now. Callum was possibly the only person in the world who knew everything about her. And the beautiful thing about Callum was that he wouldn't tell anyone's secrets. He was a vault when it came to the intimate details of other people's lives. It was a quality she had always admired. I got the results of another test today, she said now. She looked down at her hands. And, he asked. Negative, she said quietly. Naturally, he asked. She shook her head. Daphne was running out of places to go to discreetly obtain emergency contraception. I had to drive all the way to Longmont this time, she said, looking down at her hands. When are you going to tell him that you don't want to have a baby? Callum asked. You can't keep this up, Daphne. It's not going to end well for you. What's so wrong about not wanting a baby? Daphne asked, and she could feel the indignance rising in her chest. Just because I'm a woman doesn't automatically mean that I want to get married and pump out kids, she said. Daphne, come on. You know I don't believe that about women. What I do believe is that you're being unfair, Callum said, repeating the same thing he said every time she talked about this with him. I know. It's just, Stephen never wanted kids. That's something that drew me to him in the first place. It isn't fair that he changed his mind. especially when everything else is so perfect about him, she said. People are allowed to change their minds, Callum said. Daphne frowned at him and he softened. But people are also allowed to keep wanting what they've always wanted. They just need to be honest about it, he said, and he threw a dish towel at her to quell the tension. Daphne let it fall to the ground and kept looking at her hands. A single tear escaped, streaking down her cheek. She was a tough cookie, and yet she had felt on the brink of a breakdown more and more these days. Suddenly, Callum was embracing her. Hey, he said, it's going to be okay. He put his hands on her shoulders and pushed her back so he could see her face. You're right. Stephen is perfect. He's perfect for you. He's just about the only goddamn guy in the world who can put up with you. At this, Daphne smiled. He'll understand. He adores you, Callum said. And if he doesn't understand? She asked. Then you'll figure it out, Callum said. Daphne stooped to pick up the thrown dish towel and she twisted it nervously in her hands. Listen, it's going to be okay. It really is, Callum said. You will figure this out. We'll figure this out. But right now, I need you to be the bull. We have a hell of a season ahead of us, he said. Daphne nodded. Callum was right. He always was. The strange beauty of this job was that it took you away from your real problems, if only for a few hours. From the moment she clocked in to the moment she clocked out, the biggest worries were forgotten side dishes or missing bridal bouquets. She could handle those. She picked up her binder and prepared to head into the front of the house, but not before Callum slid a foil-wrapped breakfast burrito across the counter toward her. He winked, and Daphne knew that all was well.